I'm so excited to introduce our very first guest, who actually was the person who convinced me to go ahead and do this podcast, even though I'm a newbie at it. His name is Jeff Sigel. He's the author of The Middle Matters, and his one of his primary jobs is really supporting middle managers and organizations who support middle managers in this crazy time. He is one of the smartest and most thoughtful people that I know. And yeah, Jeff, can you share just a little bit about what you're working on right now?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you, first of all, for having me on. I'm so excited that this is fun. This is coming to fruition. And I really love the topic that you have chosen to focus on. Obviously, feedback is such a huge, important thing. But so glad that you did this, and so glad that you had me on. And to answer your question, what am I up to? I am up to many, many things, but probably the most relevant is after I wrote my book, The Middle Matters, that you mentioned. I started doing lots of work on helping companies with their middle managers, coaching folks, not just middle folks, but also individual contributors on how to really take charge of their careers, how to take charge of their situation, and how to sort of not feel victimized, if you will, in
Mhm.
the work that they're doing. So that's what I'm up to right now.
That's beautiful. Much needed. I keep reading articles. I think the last one was Forbes yesterday about just the struggle that middle managers are having right now and that organizations are having with middle managers. And so I love your book and I highly recommend it to anybody who is interested at all in the topic. It's a good read.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I actually have a friend who is over in Europe who actually is tracking all of the articles that are being written about middle managers, and he essentially gives them a score. And he said, I think he said it since the beginning of the year, there have been over 110 articles about middle managers, and it's really interesting. And he scores them based on whether they are, I'll kind of jokingly say pro or con.
Yeah.
What I really mean by that is pro middle management is really important. We need to train these people, which is definitely the camp that I am. And the other side is this like companies are getting rid of their middle managers. They don't need their middle managers and so forth. And we could talk about that for the whole hour, but it is a challenging world out there right now because it's sort of weird economic times. Companies are kind of like, you know, trying to cut costs and all that kind of stuff that companies always are doing. And so it's very easy to point at this middle layer who is really the glue of the organization and kind of go, what are these people doing, right? And it's fascinating because it's like it actually when people say I don't need a middle layer, we don't need a middle layer in this company, it's I almost always sort of have this, initial kind of gut reaction of, I think I see a problem here, right? Because the assumption is, why do I need somebody to transmit my ideas to the front lines if I couldn't just tell them myself? And I think that sort of fundamentally misses um, the point of being, what middle managers actually do, which is really convey purpose, train, develop people, and so forth. And when they're not doing that, the reaction shouldn't be let's get rid of them. The reaction be let's train them to do what they need to do.
Yeah, totally. When I worked with Gallup and the engagement survey and the research that they did, a lot of it is around the influence that the direct manager has on
Yep.
the individual employee. And so they have just a huge influence on whether they stay or whether they go, how happy they are with their jobs, how committed they are, how motivated they are. So I totally agree. It's like if you don't see that that's valuable, then they're probably not being really leveraged and used in the best way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about, and I know we've talked about this in the past, but if you think about, in many ways, your relationship with your boss is probably the most impactful relationship, certainly outside of your family. But
Yeah.
in some ways, for your own sort of mental health and well-being, it can sometimes be even more impactful. I'm not saying it's more important, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, the relationship with your family is more important, but you spend an awful lot of hours dealing with your work environment. And if that work environment is not sort of, conducive to you doing your best work or you learning to do your best work and so forth, then it's not just taking up the hours that you are at work. It's taking up all kinds of mental energy, feeling frustrated, anxious, etc. And so much of the role of a middle manager is how do I make sure that I have trained my folks and given them the tools and giving them the feedback and all those kinds of things so that they can do the job that they can do and not feel that anxiety and stress. I mean, there's a role for anxiety and stress, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it does to do um, sometimes amazing things, but it should not be the norm, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be that way. And the middle, I believe the folks in the middle are really essential to that. And if you take them away, what it means is that you now have a very senior boss who is often very disconnected from that, sort of frontline work because they haven't done it in years and years and years. And you're giving them, these spans of control that are very, very huge, and they just don't have the time to
Yeah.
spend the assumption is if my people are good and I just delegate the work to them and they just go do it, great. I don't need to spend any time with those people. And then all I'm going to do is spend my time with the people who are, problems and figuring out how to, either fix the problem or get them off the team or whatever it is. And it's like, well, that actually is not how you get the most out of your team. You get the most out of your team by
Right.
giving attention to the best people. And so basically the attitude is we're going to get rid of the middle so we don't have to spend because we don't need to spend any time with the best people is your best people are going to very quickly burn out or leave or stop being best people because they are like, why am I doing this? Nobody cares what I'm doing, all that kind of stuff. And then you won't, then you'll have a different problem.
I love this, Jeff. This is I tell people a lot that high performers I think are harder to manage than low performers because they don't stop and they will challenge you to do more and do differently. Low performers, I think you can kind of count on the fact that they're not going to be, uprooting your work or your life. They're just going to be, not performing. But high performers it takes a lot to manage high performers. So I think people underestimate that and totally think about just managing to the lowest common denominator. This is how all of our conversations start off. By the way, like we just get on a call
Yeah.
and go with whatever the topic of the day is. I love this.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and I completely agree with you. And I think that if you think about it with the high performers are very often people that are extremely hard on themselves, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they produce like a natural level of anxiety that is, not necessarily healthy. And so what happens is when those people who are high performers often, and I don't know, certainly I know you and I have talked about this, certainly like in my sort of upbringing going through school whatever, like it was very important to be really good, to be the best, to be perfect, to get it right, to get the A's, to get the whatever it is. And so that level of anxiety that leads to high performance actually very quickly I think turns can actually turn sort of almost internally toxic um when left to its own devices, right? Like
Yeah.
high performers when they're not getting feedback, when they're not when they can't uh, deliver because they don't know how to do something or whatever, they start to essentially attack themselves, and it creates
Mhm.
this. incredible amount of anxiety, and that kind of burnout or frustration. You made the point of like, they'll just eventually, what'll happen is this person who was like trying and trying and trying to get attention, to get positive feedback, to get that, sort of validating input, not in a world where they never get that, will eventually go, I can't do this anymore. And
Yeah.
they literally are like, they are it's really fascinating because I have these conversations with people surprisingly frequently where they're like, oh, that person left because they had mental health issues. No, they didn't have mental health issues. I mean, I'm not saying nobody does, but a lot of times the quote unquote mental health issues are just them creating stories in their head about, well, my boss isn't giving me this feedback, I must be doing a good bad job and whatever, and they're just putting all this pressure on themselves, and
Mm.
eventually they just give up. And sometimes you see this, and like people just like they just walk out, right? So like,
Yeah.
this is my last day, I'm not doing this anymore. And the people left behind are like, I don't understand, this person was doing great, they were, whatever. And it's like, no, what was happening is they were putting all this effort in and they were looking for validation. Now there,
Mm.
we could have a whole conversation about whether or not people should need the validation, but high
People need
performance,
it,
yeah,
you know?
but we do,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
matter whether they should or shouldn't. People do need that
That's
validation,
right.
and if they don't get it, especially high performers who have basically their whole lives sort of been motivated by external validation.
Yeah.
Again, the A's, the promotions, the degrees, the whatever it is, that those people will very quickly sort of, I think, spiral into, oh my God, this is terrible. My boss hates me. And the boss may not be doing anything like
Mhm.
sort of wrong other than just not dispelling that that sort of, fake feedback.
Yeah. I love that. I think it's burnout. Yeah, too. Also, when you describe just this constant working and effort and getting very little in response to that, and what you were saying is validation. I think that's right. It's just you just can't sustain that forever. Something's got to give.
Right.
So when we're talking, you mentioned feedback, and I know you have a feedback process that
Mhm.
you have in your book that I've really liked, and it's maybe too long to go into here. You have a lot of experience around this, and you have a really good system for this. So I'm curious for you, what is your response to the thought of getting or giving feedback? What is your response to that word?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think throughout my career, I think I felt like many, many people feel, which is like, oh, I don't even want the feedback, right? Like, because it's going to be bad and whatever.
Yeah.
And that, I guess my reaction when you talk about giving or receiving feedback is there is so much sort of, I don't know, I'll say culturally, I mean, it's sort of business culturally, there's so much around this idea that feedback is about corrective, it's corrective, it's punitive,
Constructive feedback
constructive,
as opposed to unconstructive feedback.
right? And that it is, I only like feedback is about something negative. You did
Mhm.
something wrong. I'm going to give you, um, I'm going to give you more, I'm going to give you more things that you need to do differently. I'm only going to
Mhm.
things that are wrong. Um, and so people don't want the feedback. Sorry, a cat has made its way into my lap here because I didn't keep the door closed enough. So, but anyway, let me see if I can get her, settled
This is
here.
entertaining.
Um, anyway, so
Little tail right by your face.
yeah, exactly. Oh well, this is the danger of going live, right? So, at any rate, so this interesting thing about how do you change people's view into this idea that feedback is actually not just about the negative, it is also about the positive.
Mhm.
And actually, really importantly about the positive, I know I talk about this in my book, and I'm sure and I came across it recently in another book, but this idea that we typically, the research, I believe, sort of would suggest that you kind of need to give, I don't know, I've heard 9 to 1, I've heard 5 to 1, I've
Mhm.
heard 3 to 1, but you have to give actually a lot more positive reinforcement,
Yeah.
negative reinforcement, right? Or
Right.
negative constructive criticism, right? You are actually get more when you tell somebody, hey, you did a great job on that,
Mhm.
and they will do more of it because we want to, we're sort of wired to please people and to,
Yeah.
you know, and so when we are giving people feedback that is like, here comes the cat again. Um, Uh, but we are wired to get this, to sort of do more of what we get praised for. And
Yeah.
I have this part in my book that some people have given me crap for, but I will share it. There was this article like probably 20 years ago, and it was called something like How to Train Your Spouse Like a Pet or something like
Oh,
that.
yeah, that's pretty bad.
It sounds terrible, but what it was really talking about was if you, whether it's your spouse or your kids or your employees or whatever, it's basically saying when you train a pet, right, you
Mhm.
are training them by getting them to do something positive. It's very difficult, for example, to train a dog not to jump. It is much
Yeah.
easier to train them to sit, right? And so
Yeah.
the way you get a dog not to jump is you train them to sit, right? It's that
I
positive
agree.
of the behavior you want and essentially ignoring the behavior that you don't want. And you get more out of the feedback is more impactful when you are
Yeah.
emphasizing the things that you want to see more of. So I'm not saying, disclaimer, I am not saying treat your employees like a pet. Saying is,
For your spouse.
or your, or your all I'm saying is there's definitely this idea that you can get people to behave in certain ways by spending more time reinforcing the positive than the negative. And that can be something as simple as, hey, that email you wrote this morning was really great. And this is the really important point that I like to emphasize when I talk about this is you have to be as specific about the positive feedback as you are about the constructive feedback. If all you say is, "Hey, great job on that email. I don't know what I did." I have to be great job on that email because you were very clear about, I know, X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, because you're trying to make sure that people understand exactly the behavior that you are praising so that they do more of it, right? That's what you're trying.
Yeah. I
So
love that.
yeah, I'd be fascinated. I'm going to throw a question back to you here. I'd be fascinated because often when I start talking about this, I get this question from people, which is
Okay.
about this idea of the sandwich. Do you know what I mean when I talk?
Oh gosh, the sandwich. Yes.
I'd be fascinated to hear your reaction to the sandwich because I have a very strong reaction to the sandwich.
I know a lot of people do. I've been a victim of the sandwich before, and I'll be honest, it's better than just hearing bad news, you know? I mean, honestly, it's like, well, here's something good, and then you can see the other thing coming, and then, well, I mean, I'll take it. It's better than the alternative of just constructive criticism. And I have so many thoughts about this, Jeff. When you I particularly have thoughts about this as a mom to a 6-year-old. I'm thinking about, I know everything that you're saying is true in terms of 5 to 1, I think is the magic ratio when it comes to relationships, when it comes to work relationships, personal relationships, whatever. 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction. And and the negative ones are so compelling. And I think about this at work too. When you see somebody do something that is really not great or that is problematic, it's
Mhm.
the need to go in and give feedback about that is so strong. When you see somebody doing something well, because it's usually not, if it's something big, of course you celebrate that. But if it is an email that was well crafted or something smaller. Um, it makes so much logical sense to do it, and it is freaking hard because it's not as compelling in
Yeah.
most cases. Yeah.
It's
So
the urgency is not there. I don't need to correct this thing, and so it's no big deal. And then what happens is you forget, right?
mhm.
Well, I don't know. And then but you don't forget the negative things. You
No.
forget, right? And so here's my, I mean, I'll give you my quick take on the
Okay.
sandwich. Here's what I like about the sandwich is that fundamentally the problem I have with the sandwich is that when we are giving feedback in the form,
Mhm.
obviously the sandwiches, I give you a piece of positive feedback, I give you a piece of constructive criticism, and then I give you another piece of positive feedback. My question is always, who are we trying to make feel better? That fundamentally the reason I am giving you positive, negative, positive is because it's going to make me feel better about
Yeah.
giving. And so there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the sandwich, but in the end of the day, when we are giving feedback, I really strongly believe that the most important thing is that it is clear that our intent in giving the feedback is about helping the person grow and not about helping us get done what we need. That's not to say that we don't need the person to do something. We need them to grow, right? We need them to not
Mhm.
things or whatever it is, but it needs to be about, I am giving you this feedback because I want to help you. And if it's
Yeah.
not, then people can see that, smell that, whatever, a mile.
Mhm.
I would say like a crap sandwich is still a crap sandwich. Right? Like it's like and I also think the other thing I don't like about the sandwich method of giving feedback is that it is very often the positives are very cursory because
Mhm. Right.
you want to rush to get like, it's sort of like the equivalent of I love your shoes. That was a really horrible presentation you gave, and your hair looks nice today. Is like everybody, like people get it. Like just saying that so that you don't feel bad about giving me the feedback, which means that the reason you're giving me the feedback is because of you, not because of me.
Ah, that's
How do you get people to really understand that I am giving this feedback to you because I want you to be successful?
that is so interesting, Jeff. I love that differentiation of why am I doing it and why am I doing it this way. And you're right, I think I totally agree with you. Healthy feedback, at least, is for the person who's asked for it or for the person that you're giving it to. And I will say, I think when people are doing the feedback sandwich or whatever the technique they're trying to do, it really stems from an actual ability issue.
Yeah,
That feedback is hard.
yeah,
Receiving feedback is hard. Giving feedback is hard. It is something that we have to learn how to do. And it comes, I think, here's therapist hat, from our relationship with our parents and growing up. And there's a certain amount of just shame inherent in feedback because it's like I missed something. I did something wrong. I don't know. There's just this old stuff that comes up for people, and the dynamics in relationships around feedback often, in my opinion, reveal some kind of
right.
triggers and patterns that people have, whether they're giving it or receiving it. So I almost think that somebody who's using the feedback sandwich is just trying to find a way to do something that they truly do not feel comfortable doing and haven't learned how to do yet.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that if you don't, I mean, absolutely, you have to practice giving feedback. You can't just do it and never have anybody explain to you how it's done. But I think, what I'm sure you see a lot of, and what I see a lot of is that I don't know most, I don't have the data, but it seems like an awful lot of people only give feedback in two circumstances.
Okay.
One of them is I give feedback when there is a problem.
Okay.
Other is I give feedback at review time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the problem with both of those types of feedback is they're both about them or someone else.
Yeah.
Like the feedback I give when I'm giving people, um, you know, when I'm giving somebody negative feedback because they did something wrong, it's about, I need you to fix this for me, right? You're making me look,
Mhm.
your team look bad, whatever it is. When I'm giving feedback at the end of the year review, it's because I have to get this done.
My gosh, that's so insightful, Jeff. I've never really thought about that before.
So,
I,
so
yeah.
no, so I mean, I think the interesting question is how do you change the giving of feedback to be about how do I help this person learn and grow? And if I can
Mhm.
make it about them, then they will, even if it's hard to hear. I mean, I've given hard to hear feedback to people and had people thank me for it before.
Mhm.
They know that I gave it to them because I wanted to help them, right? And it
Yeah.
may pain in the moment, but they're like, but the next day they'll pop in your office and they're like, thank you for saying that. Because if you didn't say that, I was going to go through the rest of my career doing this thing. It's a little bit like it's like that the proverbial piece of broccoli in your teeth, right? Like
Mhm.
you told me, why didn't you tell me, right? And this is I mean, I'm sure and we've probably talked about radical candor, but the story that
Mhm.
I remember the most from radical candor is the story she tells about this employee that Kim Scott had this employee who wasn't doing well, and everybody, and she was avoiding giving feedback,
Mhm.
she was starting to, the rest of the team was starting to revolt on her, and she finally was like, she took this guy out to lunch and basically let him go, and he looked at her and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And it's just such a poignant thing. It's like, wow, like, yeah, like I should have said something a long time ago. And
Yeah.
it wasn't helping anyone for me not to tell this person. And so I think if you can figure out how to make the feedback not about you, but about them, that's where I feel like the most value happens. And I am
Mhm.
not going to pretend for a second that I have ever been perfect at that. Right? Because it's hard. It is hard to do it. It's hard to remember to do it. It's hard to, it's like we don't like to give the negative feedback and we don't
Mhm.
remember positive feedback.
Yeah, so true. And I think what you talked about too is just that you practice it. Yeah, it's not fun. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel natural. You have to really make yourself do it. And the thing that drives you to do it is your intent to help somebody else, and that helps you get over that discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, we both come from, backgrounds where we worked for a restaurant company, and
Mhm.
where you actually see some of the best examples of really good feedback is in a really well-run restaurant or
Mhm.
retail operation, or where it is very, very busy and there is no time to mess around with mistakes being made or whatever, is feedback is being given all the time, positive,
Yeah.
constructive, and there is no negative connotation to it. Like, hey,
Mhm.
the tables aren't getting cleaned as fast as they need to. I need you to focus on making sure your tables are getting clean because we really need to turn these, tables faster, or whatever it is. And it's like
Yeah.
that quick, right? It's that
Mhm.
very, very fast, like, hey, there is no judgment here. I am not holding this against you. I am not saying this is your end of your review. I'm saying we need to get these tables clean because we need to turn more tables. And I am just trying to help you be more successful so that we can all be more successful, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's that, but the other thing that's amazing is in a restaurant, like people like, there's a constant, at least when it's running well, you also hear a constant stream of positives. Hey, thank you for doing that.
So true.
Really appreciate that you did this. Nice job, being a team player. What I remember working in a restaurant one day when I wasn't working in a restaurant. I was, sort of visiting the restaurant or whatever, and I was helping out, and I just remember, getting feedback. Thanks for being such a team player, because I would, go and clear off, the glasses off of people's tables that, other people's tables, and get those tables clean and whatever. And I think that constant stream of positive and constructive feedback is it's easier to take because you actually become you don't take every piece of feedback as if it's like the end of the world, right?
Right.
And I think when we only give feedback when it's negative or at the end of the year, it's so infrequent that it becomes really hard for the person to sort of acclimate to, oh, when my boss tells me that I need to, turn this table faster, they are not questioning my future.
And they're also arm to arm, elbow to elbow with the people who are doing the work, as opposed to kind of those meetings that tend to take more time or happen more infrequently. It's like the leaders tend to, I think, be more separated from the work too. So the actual feedback might feel off for people. Okay, I'm excited to hear about your most powerful feedback moment because we didn't talk about, is it feedback that you got? Is it feedback that you gave? And I can't wait to hear about it. So I'm wondering, can you set us up as much as possible in the first person? I have this like in my imagination. You can just take us there, of when this happened, where you were, what you were doing in this moment when you got or had your most powerful feedback moment.
So I'm going to be super open here because it's a
Okay.
very powerful moment. So I recently, it's only been recently that I sort of have recognized the value of therapy. And
Okay.
it was a couple weeks ago, I think, and I was talking with my therapist, and we were talking about management and leadership, and which, I talk about a lot, obviously, because I wrote this book, and I was, talking, I don't remember what the scenario exactly we were talking about. We were having this conversation, and my therapist asked me this really, really poignant question, which
Mm.
was, what kind of leader were you? And I thought for a few moments, and I said to her, I'm like, I think I would describe my leadership style as benign over manager. Not micromanager. I don't think I was a micromanager, but I think I was a little bit, I historically have been a little bit too involved. And I could go on this long, explanation of how I really think that what kind of got me over that eventually was that I started managing people that did things that I did not know how to do. And so I could not overmanage. And so I often say I written the book that I wrote until I had the job, the job that I have where I was managing like data analysts and something. I don't know anything about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the feedback that I got in that moment was the real like gut punch because we had been talking a lot about some of my anxiety about, things that were happening with my kids and so forth.
Mm.
And so when I said I was a benign overmanager, she said, "Oh, just like with your kids." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And it was like this. I'm like, that is so true. And wow, that was like
Punch to the
I
gut.
I had not made that connection between my sort of need to control things in in the work environment and my need, desire, whatever that I think many of us,
Hmm.
not all of us have as parents of to control our kids and try and make, because and that's what I mean. Like when I say benign over manager, like I really mean it. Like I really want the best. I am like any other
Yeah.
parent, best for my kids. I want them to succeed. And was I had been trying to control the situation too much. And in many ways, I've sort of come to realize in the last, whatever, I don't know when this happened, a couple weeks ago, a
Mhm.
couple months ago, whatever. Like I'm like, oh, huh, this is really interesting. I was trying to control the situation too much. I was trying to, make things happen the way I wanted them to happen. And that actually, when I back off, things seem to fix themselves
Mm.
much more quickly than when I try and get involved, which is frankly the lesson I needed to learn as a manager. I just had never really thought about it as a parent. So I don't know, that was my most point.
That is huge, Jeff. Gosh, first of all, I thank you for the transparency. You know, I'm a huge fan of therapy. I've been in therapy and doing therapy for years. So I totally, when you have, it sounds like you have a really good therapist. Um, what I mean, that was wonderful the way you told that story because I felt it for you. I was just like in that moment, I could just know that feeling of just total new awareness.
You just put a
Yeah,
mirror up. It was like, huh, this is, I mean, it was, yeah, it was, it was a really powerful moment and a
yeah.
really moment. And it's funny because I was not that long ago, I was on a call, and somehow we were talking about I don't know what exactly we were talking about networking or something. I don't know. We were talking about how, it was sort of like one of those kids these days conversations,
Mm,
and and one of the people that was in the call made a comment about one of their kids and that, they couldn't, get them to motivate them to do the thing that they wanted them to do. And I
mm.
said, I literally said, I have no idea what the answer to your challenge is. I just can tell you that the best piece of parenting advice that I have received recently is stop trying to control the situation, right? Because you can't.
Yeah.
And you know what? Your kids, your employees, there will be disasters. There will be errors,
Mhm.
mistakes. I actually have this thing that I sometimes say, which is that delegation is a leap of faith, but it's not a leap of faith that your team will always get things right. It is a leap of faith that your team will get things wrong and it will be okay.
Mm.
And I really believe that that applies not just to being a boss, but also to being a parent.
Yeah, we don't. It's about repair and restoration, right? Fixing what went wrong. It's not possible to have perfection or not deal with issues, but it's about that's how people learn to grow and do better is that repair process.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think that's very true. I mean, you can't become great without learning, and you can't learn if you don't ever make mistakes, right? I mean, this is the
mhm.
Harold Dweck fixed and growth mindset, all of that stuff basically says the more you are focused on perfection and achieving, actually the less risk you take and the less you grow, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I have this strong belief that I've actually had this strong belief for a really long time, but I'm not sure I truly understood it until,
Hmm.
which is I believe that we need to do more work when we are raising kids through school, whatever, and teaching them how to fail. And there are some kids that unfortunately get ample experience in failing and kind of give up. But there are also equally a group of students who don't really ever experience failure. And because
Hmm.
they experience failure as a kid, sort of learning these things because they only do the activities that they do well at, or they only,
Yeah.
whatever, that because they don't experience that failure, they actually become reluctant and
Yeah.
let risk averse and they don't grow. And that, that's what's fast, it's just this fascinating thing is like the more you try and again control everything, the less control you end up having. Anyway, that's my take on on that experience, but it was a very powerful moment. So
You just, you know how sometimes you give me so much to think about that my brain works way faster than my mouth. I'm kind of in one of those moments right now where I have three different threads going. I want to go back to one thing, which is I'm shocked that you described yourself as a benign what was it? Over manager. Like that's shocking to me that that would be the way that you would describe yourself. Was that shocking to you when it came out of your mouth, or did it feel?
um, that's an interesting question. I think that it was a little bit of a surprise. It's something that I've kind of realized over time, that just from feedback I've gotten from people who have worked for me in the past and whatever, like I always thought I like I mean, I had asked some people just some people that I worked for me a very long time ago for feedback about like how what my management style when I was sort of working on my book and so forth. And I got this feedback from somebody who was like, you were a great boss, and here's what here's the great things you did, whatever. But I really wish that you had been more willing to just let me do what I wanted to do, whatever, or what I need, do my thing, whatever. Which was fascinating to me because when I think about that particular relationship, I think that I was giving that person incredible amounts of free reign. Like,
Yeah.
not micromanaging.
Mhm.
In my view, I was not at all. And so it's fascinating. Like this person came to me, and they said, I have this idea of how I want to do this thing. It was not the way I wanted to do it, but I was like, okay, I'm going to let you do it this way and whatever. And yet their reaction was, you were over managing me or whatever, or micromanaging me, whatever word
Yeah.
they. I'm like, I'm not sure I understand exactly what that is, but in the
Mhm.
end of the day, I kind of need to own it, right? I need to basically say at some point I was too involved. And again,
Mhm.
I come back to you, like when I really believe that I learned to lead was when I was managing people who did things that I did not know how to do.
Yeah.
And that what the window that I was sort of opened for me when I was managing somebody. For example, at some point I had home office facilities reported into me. I am a marketer. I studied chemistry and physics in college. I studied marketing in business school. I do not know anything about HVAC systems at all, and I didn't need to, right?
Yeah.
I remember that that person actually came back to me, after they were reporting to somebody else, and like, oh my gosh, I miss you. You were so
Aw.
awesome. Why? Because I wasn't spending any time telling her how to do her job. I was giving
Yeah.
her zero input on, I don't know how to do your job. I was spending all my time saying, let's focus on how you're growing your people, or let's focus on where you're running into obstacles, or let's focus on how you are presenting yourself and your ideas to the company. I'm not going to spend any time telling you how to do HVAC stuff. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
My time on helping you with the things that maybe you haven't had as much instruction on, and that's what they really appreciate. And I think what was happening, and this is why I say it's a benign overmanage, like
Mhm.
I was not trying to micromanage. I was not trying to force things to happen, but I was giving my opinions about
Mhm.
what I thought should happen, and that felt to people like micromanaging,
Yeah.
even though ultimately I was letting them do what they want to do. It's
Mhm.
fascinating to me that people who have given me that feedback, I can point to specific moments when I was like, I let this person do something and I was not comfortable with it at all. And I
Yeah.
their way, and I'm not sure I made the right decision letting them do
Yeah.
it, but I did. And then to kind of get this sort of feedback back of, oh, yeah, but I felt like I was being overmanaged, or I felt like I was being micromanaged, or whatever, it's fascinating because I think that micromanagement and overmanagement, or whatever you want to call it, is more complicated than just there absolutely is a version of it where you're like literally like, okay, do this and put this here, and I'm going to correct everything you do, and I'm going to redo everything that you do, and whatever. That is one brand of micromanagement or whatever. When I say overmanagement, what I mean is, how do you give people enough free reign to do the things that they know how to do? Now, we could
Mhm.
unpack for another hour why people do that. Is
Yes.
almost always because there's somebody above them who is nitpicking at everything. And our reaction to my boss is nitpicking at me is to nitpick at the people,
Yeah.
you know, that work.
And I think what you're highlighting is something that is just so common with feedback, and why it's so difficult is because you have your truth and 100% because it was a struggle for you. You know that you let go of the reins when you didn't want to. You know you gave room when you felt like not doing that because it was so difficult. And that's so true for you. And at the same time, some people who were working for you experienced you differently than that. And that is also completely true for them. And it's just the crazy thing about but feedback is that it isn't facts. it's truly just, this is how it felt to me. This is how I saw it. This is how I lived it. And this is how you lived it. And it's not that your perspective needs to be absorbed by that person, but I like what you said of just, I have to take that in. I always like to say acceptance,
Right.
because it would be so great if somebody understood what we were saying, but it's also with people with different histories, different backgrounds, different thought processes, like unlikely that somebody's going to totally get your perspective and vice versa.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I mean, and I think that's actually, I mean, it's a really good point that you're making, which is that one of the values of feedback and one of the values of asking for feedback from people is to help you see what you can't see, right? I mean, that's the
yeah,
I probably could have solved some of those, some of that over management feedback. I probably could have solved it by being more open to asking for feedback, right?
yeah.
Um, and I think that actually asking for feedback, and this is, one of the things I love about the work that you're doing is
Hmm.
we need to normalize asking for feedback
Hmm.
because feedback again we avoid and just like managers avoid giving feedback because they're like, "Oh, I don't want to give this because I don't want to make them feel bad and it's really that not that big of a deal. They didn't just I don't want to make this into a big thing and blah, blah, whatever." The same thing is true of people who are you know being managed, right,
Yeah,
and who are afraid to ask for feedback, right, because
yeah.
if I ask for feedback, I might hear something that I don't want to hear.
Hmm.
The reality is, if you think about this again, if we can get everybody in the mindset of when my boss gives me feedback, they give me feedback to help me grow. If I could get, if that's not true in all
Right.
cases,
Not
right?
always.
But but if we could create a world in which that was always true, and we knew that when somebody gave us feedback, that they were giving us that feedback to help us, then would we be more willing to ask for feedback? Because
Yeah,
if you don't get the feedback, you will not grow. You cannot get
right.
better. You won't know, right? Because you can't see what you can't see. And so it's fascinating. Somebody told me this story probably, I don't know, it was probably like 6 months ago. And they were telling me the story about this person who was like feeling tortured by their relationship with their boss, that their boss, felt that they were doing a terrible job. They felt like they were on the verge of being fired, and they would not ask for feedback because if I ask for feedback, was the thinking, then I will be fired. And
Yeah.
when you think about that, I understand that thinking. I'm not
Hmm.
saying I don't understand that thinking, but when you think about it from a very logical perspective, it's kind of a weird thing to think, right? It's
Hmm.
actually a pretty strange perspective. If my boss is so upset with me that they're about to fire me, the thing that is going to push them over the edge is that I asked. That doesn't make any sense, right? But
That's where I go back to your relationship with your parents as a kid. I think relationship with authority has a lot to do with what our expectations and our behaviors are around feedback. And it's possible this person has had an experience where, as long as things are kept under the surface and not directly addressed, then they're let go. But if you bring something up to the forefront, then things are, you know, I don't know how to say it, but hastened. They happened quicker. And so, yeah, I know it wasn't, but it's so real to that person.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, I totally get it. It's just, it's just this fascinating thing of like that's the logic we learn. And
Yeah.
I don't even think that the logic is that unusual. I think it's actually
No.
quite common, right? That people feel like they can't ask for feedback for fear that if they ask for feedback, they are going to find out something horrible that is going to
Yeah.
lead to some horrible outcome. And it's like, the flip side of that is, but if you don't get that feedback, you can't solve that problem.
Right.
You can't
Yeah.
you can't know what the problem is. So you have to ask sometimes because frankly, because your boss wasn't trained to give the feedback, one way to get them to give the feedback is to ask them for the feedback. And I
Yeah.
actually, when I do trainings, I actually train people. I'm like, when somebody gives you positive feedback, you should ask them, thank you for, or you should say, thank them for the feedback. Thank you for the feedback.
Hmm.
I think we should all learn to thank people for feedback, whether it's positive or negative, right?
Yeah.
Even things or whatever. But when somebody gives you positive feedback, thank them for the feedback, and then ask them, can you be more specific?
Mm,
Like, tell me, like, when your boss says to you, good job, say, hey, I'm really trying to learn and grow. I want to make sure I can replicate this in the future. Can you be more specific about what it is that was a good job? I think that's really
yeah.
important.
I do too. Not only for the reasons we talked about earlier, which is that you can replicate what you know is valued where you are, but also that it gives you that positive interaction of you really start to build that emotional response to feedback as something different than negative when you're getting prolonged positive feedback or more positive feedback is kind of helping you shape that for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeff, I know we always come up on the end of our conversations, just it's like, oh, it's time. I have one question for you. I have so many questions for you, but I have one
Yeah.
question that I'm just curious. So, how do you think, I wonder how timing plays a part in this because I know you had said, in the past, if I had asked for more feedback, then I would have done differently. But I really wonder what you think about the timing of this powerful feedback that you just got and how it might have struck you differently at a different time.
I think that's a really good question because, and I've been saying this a lot, just a lot of things that have happened, for example, for me over the last year. I am not sure if I hadn't gone through that year and all the things that came before it, I'm not sure I would have, um, you know, I might have kind of pushed that off. I might have said
Yeah,
that's or whatever, or I, you don't know what you're talking about. Whatever it is, I would have been much more, I think I would have been more dismissive. And so this is, I think this goes back to this idea, like we have to, give ourselves some, I don't know, the best word for it is probably grace.
yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
We have to give ourselves some grace in that none of us are perfect. We are all learning, and that in many cases, we can't learn the things. There's a sequence, right? To your
Yeah,
point, there's a sequence. We have to learn thing one before we learn thing two. And if we don't do it in that sequence, we won't learn thing two, or we'll learn something else, but it won't be that. And I think
yeah.
for me, like I said, it didn't dawn on me until, my book was already published when I realized this point. I think it was just from talking a lot to people, being on other podcasts, whatever
Mhm.
it is, um, that I suddenly had this realization I could not have written this book if I had not had the experience of managing people who knew things that I did not know how to do.
Mm,
And I would never like if you had asked me that, sort of, even 2 months before I published the book, I would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. But it was because I was talking through it and I'm going, huh, that's really interesting. I'm talking a lot about leadership and how people become overly controlling of leadership. And it sort of, that's when it dawned on me. I'm like, oh, when I stopped being, again, I don't know. You'd have to ask people. I don't think I was a terrible leader. I'm not like, whatever.
I
But
can't imagine, Jeff.
as somebody said to me when I said something in another podcast or whatever about being a benign overmanager, and one of my former direct reports um, sent me a note and said, "We always appreciated your benign overmanagement."
That's nice.
So it's nice, right? A little validation, right?
Yeah.
But I think that but I don't think I would have understood any of that without going through the process of writing a book, of thinking about this, talking about this all the time, seeing what's happening in companies that I work with and so forth. I would not have understood what was, this feedback about me as a manager. And then if I hadn't understood that feedback about me as a manager, the feedback about me as a parent wouldn't have meant anything, right?
Yeah.
Oh, huh, that's really interesting. I used to do this. I've learned not to do it, but I'm still doing it over here. Which is
Just
best. And I am sure
super.
if you ask my kids, they'd say I still do it. I'm, I'm not perfect. but we learn, right? And that's how we
Yeah.
learn. So
Jeff, I am so grateful. I'm so grateful for you and that we got connected. It's the craziest thing. Kendra got us connected on LinkedIn, and like every conversation we have is just,
agree.
it feeds my brain and it feeds my soul. It's really energizing. And I think part of it is because you are so authentic. You are thoughtful. And I mean that in like a, the fact that you came up with the term benign over management, like that is the thoughtfulness I'm talking about. You really, you are so thoughtful and smart and open, and you're like one of the best people I know. So I just want to say seriously, thank you for being you, for doing the work that you do. And how can people get a hold of you? By the way, I don't think we ever made it live, so I'm gonna post this as soon as we get done. How do you think? How can people get a hold of you, or who should be contacting you?
Sure. So a couple of things. First of all, I just want to say thank you. It is such an honor to be the first guest on your on your podcast. Um, but best way to get a hold of me, a couple of things. One is to connect with me on LinkedIn. You just look me up under Jeff Sigel and look for the middle management stuff, and you'll figure it out. Um, or you can go to my website. I have an author website that's literally my name, jeffsiegel.com, and it's a great place to reach me. And who should reach out to me? Anybody who is really looking to help, particularly their middle folks, or even their individual contributors, but help them to be more empowered, to have more ownership and accountability, but also to feel more empowered in their work. That's who I find that I can have the most impact with. In companies where the senior leaders are like, we need this layer to be more empowered. That's really the best group. And then and of course, anybody who wants to talk to me, I do also do, individual coaching, but anybody who's sort of either in those middle lower roles or is leading middle folks and wants to have a conversation, I would love to have them reach out to me.
Awesome. I highly recommend him. Five out of 5 stars.